Let's talk about NATO. US President Donald Trump is frustrated with the bloc. He wants every member to spend at least 5% of their GDP on defense.
If you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend.
I know some may have concerns about NATO's future.
If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
We must not choose between the US and Europe. We never have historically, and we're not going to do so now.
I present today to the leaders the Rearm Europe plan.
So there are disagreements. But let's say NATO agrees to Trump's demands. We live in a world where all members of the bloc are spending 5% or more of the GDP on defense. Will the hike in defense spending save NATO? Will Trump have no further demands? And won't this provoke Russia further? I'm Ananya Dutta. Let's get some answers. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO for short, is a military alliance formed in 1949. The trigger point was the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It had started with just 12 members. But today, 32 countries make the bloc from North America and Europe. The latest addition was Sweden last year. The trigger this time was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Interestingly, about 30 years ago, there were talks of inviting Russia to the bloc. I wonder what kind of a world we would be living in had that been true. But let's stick to reality. In one short month as president, Trump has undercut the trust that sat at the very center of this 75-year-old defense pact. It wasn't a surprise. European officials knew Trump's win would threaten the fundamentals of this bloc. But the speed at which it is unraveling has caught the continent off guard.
I view NATO as potentially good, but you gotta get some good thinking in NATO. It's very unfair what's been happening. Until I came along, we were paying close to 100% of NATO. So think of it, we're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade.
Washington is clearly tired of being NATO's security blanket. As of 2024, NATO's defense spending totaled $1.18 trillion. About 64% of this came from the United States. So it's not close to 100% as Trump says, but it is a significant amount. Last year, around 75% of NATO members met or surpassed the 2% defense spending minimum. That leaves 8 countries: Belgium, Canada, Croatia, Italy, Luxembourg, Portugal, Slovenia, and Spain. They have failed to do so. At a time when 2% is looking ambitious, Trump is talking about increasing the threshold to 5%. Forget about NATO, very few countries in the whole world are spending 5% of their GDP on defense, not even the US. The list includes just 10 countries: Algeria, Armenia, Israel, Lebanon, Oman, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Sudan, and Ukraine, with the highest spending. It is important to note that most of these countries were recently or are currently at war. All of NATO's 32 members, barring one, are nowhere close to Trump's 5% proposal. Only Poland comes remotely close at 4.12%. So how are European partners so confident that they could change this? As they say, beggars can't be choosers.
President Trump has made clear its commitment of the US and his commitment personally to NATO. And it has also made clear the expectation that we in Europe must do more in terms of defense spending.
Today, the United States is a slightly more demanding, more difficult partner. But by arming ourselves, we should de facto influence the improvement of transatlantic relations. Maintaining NATO and the alliance with the United States must also be our absolute priority.
I've always been clear that we need to ensure that the US, the UK, Europe and Ukraine are working together, but we must not choose between the US and Europe. We never have historically, and we're not going to do so now.
Trump has constantly criticized his fellow NATO members for failing to take on proportional burden sharing. Less than 24 hours ago, he sent fresh threats. If Europe doesn't pay up, US will not defend them. This goes against Article 5 of NATO's principles, which says an attack on one is an attack on all.
If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. You said, oh, he's violating NATO. And you know, the biggest problem I have with NATO, I really, I know the guys very well. They're friends of mine. But if the United States was in trouble and we called them, we said, we got a problem. France, we got a problem. A couple of others I won't mention. Do you think they're going to come and protect us? They're supposed to. I'm not so sure.
Many experts are calling Trump's threats a double game, where he doesn't want to secure NATO, rather wants economic leverage. You see, if European partners increase their defense spending, it could mean more sales for US arms manufacturers. And that could in turn mean a boost for the US economy. Experts warn there could be another game at play here, where Trump's 5% call is intended to foment an excuse for Washington to pull out of NATO entirely. Because numbers show 5% is a far-fetched dream at this point. The United States far surpasses the rest of the world in defense spending. In 2024, that's last year, its Defense Department recorded a defense budget of $968 billion. This is not only more than double the total amount that NATO's European pillar brings, it's also more than double the combined total of Chinese and Russian defense spending. And the US spends more in defense than the next 12 countries combined. Even though far-fetched, if all countries were to meet the 5% threshold, then NATO will be emboldened to heights the world has never seen before. But the question right now is, will that be enough to deter Russia? The short answer is no. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested that having 100,000 to 150,000 European troops in Ukraine as part of a deterrence force could be sufficient for security guarantees. To meet that demand, NATO officials estimate that a pool of at least 500,000 troops would be needed. And that is not okay with Trump, and definitely not okay with Russia.
I want to say it again. Not a supposedly hybrid, but a direct, official, undisguised involvement of NATO countries in a war against the Russian Federation. This cannot be allowed, and especially against the backdrop of Macron's Nova statement yesterday that Russia is a threat to Europe, and therefore, if this is a threat, then troops must be sent against this threat.
At some point or the other, one has to look beyond Ukraine. The Indo-Pacific is shaping up as the new arena for power struggle. However, none of the US's allies in the region are members of NATO. Does this mean that Trump would rather focus on strengthening Quad than NATO? And is NATO now on the path of a slow death? What Trump does in the near future may hold all the answers.